Can the hands of a single human determine the fate of an entire empire? As a queen teeters on the edge of death, only courage, ingenuity, and a dash of desperate humor might hold the key to saving a galaxy. Doctor. Adrian Keller stumbled through the gleaming corridors of the ethereal mandate asterisk, trying to keep his balance on the subtle anti-grav hum that kept the ship from sagging into the blackness of space. He had been summoned with the kind of urgency usually reserved for intergalactic disasters, supernova warnings, or, as he jokingly muttered to himself, alien tea parties gone horribly wrong. The message had been blunt. Your skills are required. Failure is not an option. Do not bring coffee. Adrian had ignored the last line. He paused at the entrance to the medical bay, blinking against the soft, pulsating light that seemed to hum in rhythm with some unseen energy source. The room was enormous, a wide, circular expanse filled with hovering equipment that looked like it had been ripped from a science museum rather than a hospital. Tiny drones buzzed in arcs above an array of holographic monitors, projecting vital signs in shapes and colors Adrian had never seen. It felt like walking into a planetarium after a particularly aggressive caffeine binge. And there she was. Lysara, the alien queen, laid out on a levitating dais in the center of the room, her long ears draped gracefully along the side of her face, twitching in faint, almost imperceptible patterns. Her skin glowed faintly white, like moonlight reflected on snow, and her eyes shimmered with hues of amber and violet that seemed almost impossibly deep, as if someone had condensed the cosmos into two irises. She was fragile, a fragile elegance suspended between life and death, and Adrian's stomach knotted. Yet somehow, despite the weight of the moment, he couldn't help quipping under his breath, "Well, at least the lighting is dramatic." A small drone hovered close, its voice polite but unmistakably sassy. "Your humor is inappropriate for the gravity of this situation, human surgeon." Adrian blinked. "Yeah, well, I find inappropriate humor helps me survive galactic emergencies." The drone emitted a sound suspiciously close to an electronic sigh. The advisors, tall, thin, almost ethereal beings with translucent limbs that shimmered under the bay's light, hovered at the edges of the room, murmuring to one another in a language that made Adrian feel like a toddler trying to decipher quantum mechanics. One of them, clearly the senior advisor, leaned toward Adrian with a pointed stare, which he immediately returned with a sheepish shrug. "The audacity of human hands," the advisor muttered in a tone that Adrian was pretty sure was universal for, "I'm not sure you belong here, but let's watch carefully." Another advisor leaned over and added, "If he fails, at least we can call it the first accidental dethronement of a queen by a coffee-addicted species." Adrian suppressed a laugh, realizing that humor, even in translation, was somehow part of their culture. Adrian moved closer to Lysara, noting the subtle quivers of her long ears. They were more than decoration. Their movement conveyed information about her physical state, about pain, stress, even minor emotional fluctuations. He had to pay attention to these tiny signals. A misread twitch could cost a life. Conventional medicine was useless here. Alien physiology, especially that of a ruling queen, had evolved in ways human anatomy could only dream of. Even human surgical techniques needed adaptation, and the tech available, though impressive, was experimental. "Good morning, doctor," Lysara murmured, her voice faint but tinged with a sharp, sardonic edge. "I hope you're not planning to nick me for practice." Adrian swallowed hard. "Good morning, Your Majesty. I was planning to save you, and maybe, if all goes well, I'll get to practice making coffee after." Her lips twitched, possibly in amusement or maybe in the tiniest fraction of a smile. The assistant drones beeped impatiently, signaling that he needed to move quickly. Adrian ignored them and instead studied the Queen's condition in detail. Injuries from the recent skirmish had left her internal systems destabilized. The liver analog was failing, the neuroenergy conduits were fluctuating, and every attempt at conventional alien healing had been met with rejection. It was clear. The only way to save her was a hybrid procedure, a combination of human surgical methods and alien bioengineering nanites. He frowned. Hybrid surgery, uncharted territory. One mistake, and he could not only lose a patient but also trigger political chaos across star systems. He glanced at Lysara, who was staring at him with eyes that seemed to contain a galaxy's worth of judgment. She raised an eyebrow, the slightest flick of her long ear accentuating the gesture. Adrian felt simultaneously intimidated and oddly reassured. She was conscious, and in a strange way she trusted him enough to let him try. "Do try not to kill me, doctor," she murmured, voice dry, "though I suppose a dramatic exit could be amusing for the historians." Adrian laughed nervously. "I'll aim for boring heroics. No dramatic exits, promise." He activated the hovering surgical interface, scanning her body with nanotech probes that painted a three-dimensional map of her internal systems. Tiny projections hovered around the queen, showing her neural flow, energy pulses, and the delicate balance of bioelectrical fields. Adrian noted how the long ears were linked directly to these fields, acting almost like tuning forks for her vital signs. Adjusting for that would be tricky, but necessary. He couldn't simply apply human surgical logic. Every move had to be adapted on the fly. A minor catastrophe occurred when one of the assistant drones attempted to hand him a tool and instead tried to hand him his coffee mug. Adrian yelped, snatching it out of the air before it could spill, and Lysara's eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement. "Human rituals are fascinating," she murmured. "You require this dark liquid to function." "Yes," Adrian admitted, "and yes, occasionally it works wonders." He took a sip, careful not to spill, and then forced himself to focus. This wasn't a joke anymore. Every second mattered, every twitch of an ear, every pulse of neural energy was a signal he had to interpret correctly. The advisors hovered nervously. One whispered in a low hum that sounded like wind through crystalline towers, "Will he succeed?" Another countered, "Or will history remember him as a footnote, the human who overstepped?" Adrian caught fragments, understanding enough to know that politics were as tense as medicine in this scenario. He placed his hands near her thoracic energy nodes, noting the faint pulsing of light beneath her skin. A mistake here could destabilize her entirely. Yet, even in the gravity of the moment, Adrian tried to lighten the atmosphere. "So, Lysara," he said softly, "do you usually have people hover over you while you nap, or is this just a special occasion?" The queen's ears twitched sharply, and a faint, amused sound escaped her. "You are very bold, doctor, perhaps too bold, or perhaps amusing enough to survive this stage of the procedure." Adrian smiled, inwardly relieved. Humor, even the tiniest shared spark, could bridge species and fear alike. He activated the nanite interface, careful to calibrate the delicate instruments. Lights blinked, energy fields shimmered, and tiny, autonomous surgical drones moved into position with almost imperceptible precision. Minutes felt like hours as he worked, gently adjusting bioconduits, redirecting energy pulses, and carefully integrating alien nanotech into her failing systems. Each step required patience, precision, and an occasional whispered joke to himself. One drone emitted a chirp that sounded suspiciously like, "You can do it, human." Adrian muttered back, "I hope your ancestors forgive me if I don't." Lysara's eyes fluttered slightly open. "Do try to be gentle," she murmured, her tone a mix of jest and seriousness. "I have plans, you know, and my empire isn't going to run itself." He nodded. "Understood. Let's keep the empire intact and your life even more intact, shall we?" And with that, Adrian Keller, a human surgeon far from his comfortable hospital corridors, began the most daring, delicate, and unpredictable procedure of his life. Every twitch of her long ears, every shimmer in her glowing skin, and every pulse of neural energy was a silent reminder that he was balancing not just a life, but the fate of an entire alien civilization on the edge of his hands, tempered with nerves, wit, and a dash of stubborn human optimism. The first hours passed with tense precision, punctuated by Lysara's dry, sometimes sarcastic commentary and Adrian's nervous, muttered jokes. Slowly, as he adapted to her physiology, he began to see signs of stabilization. The pulsing light in her energy nodes steadied, the neuroflow smoothed, and her ears twitched in a rhythm that suggested relief. He allowed himself a quiet smile, daring even to whisper, "See, told you human coffee-fueled hands could do the job." The room was still tense, the advisors watching like statues, the drones hovering like eager schoolchildren, but Adrian felt a tiny spark of hope. This was only the beginning. And despite the looming dangers, he found a strange, fragile joy in the banter, the quiet jokes, and the trust that was slowly building between human and queen. It was absurd, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. And as Lysara's eyes shone faintly brighter, amber swirling with violet, Adrian thought, if I can survive this, maybe the universe isn't entirely impossible to navigate. One joke, one twitching ear, one careful move at a time. Adrian found himself sitting in a small observation alcove adjacent to the Queen's chamber, a holographic coffee cup hovering in his hand, filled with something that was almost certainly a placebo. The bay hummed faintly, a constant undercurrent of starship engines and the quiet thrumming of Lysara's stabilized biofields. He stared at the array of monitors, each pulsing with alien symbology, trying to convince himself that he wasn't about to faint from a cocktail of nerves and exhaustion. He had survived the first stage of the hybrid procedure, and yet the weight of what came next pressed down with the subtle insistence of a gravity well. A small drone zipped past, its wings making a faint whirring sound reminiscent of a tiny, electronic mosquito. "Dr. Keller, the Queen is conscious. She requests your presence." Adrian swore softly under his breath and set the holographic cup down. "Right, as if I didn't already feel like a character in some interstellar soap opera." He strode through the corridor, the hum of the anti-gravity fields making his legs feel simultaneously lighter and oddly sluggish. As he entered the Queen's private chamber, he was greeted by a faint scent of ionized air mixed with something floral and sharp, a fragrance that seemed designed to unsettle intruders while reminding subjects of royal authority. Lysara lay reclined, her long ears slightly elevated, twitching with an almost imperceptible rhythm. Her amber and violet eyes tracked him with the precision of a hawk and the curiosity of a child. "You seem unusually calm," she said, her voice faint but imbued with her usual sardonic edge. "Or is that just the effect of the placebo you insist on calling coffee?" Adrian gave a lopsided grin. "Partly coffee, partly adrenaline, partly sheer stubbornness. Take your pick." Her faint smile, a quirk that made her seem almost human in her humor, was followed by a light flick of her ears. "Stubbornness is a dangerous trait. One day it might get you killed, or worse, famous." He chuckled. "I'll aim for boring heroism. Low risk, high reward. Boring heroism, very underrated in the intergalactic dictionary." The Queen's advisors hovered at the periphery, their lithe forms shimmering in the soft light. They spoke in hushed tones, a melodic hum that Adrian could barely follow, though he caught fragments. "He is inexperienced, yet precise, perhaps, unusual humans." Adrian found himself wishing he could respond, if only to tell them that inexperienced often came with a side of chaos that somehow worked. He moved closer, adjusting the tiny nanite interface that still monitored her systems. The hybrid procedure was delicate, far beyond anything human medicine had attempted, yet even alien protocols were insufficient for her specific physiology. Adrian marveled at how her long ears acted almost like external neural regulators, subtle instruments that reflected her bioelectrical state in real time. He reached out to adjust the energy nodes around her thoracic area, careful not to disrupt the delicate balance. "Be gentle," she murmured, one eyebrow arching slightly. "I have plans beyond being a decorative figure for human experiments." "Yes, of course. Plans that involve ruling an empire rather than inspiring poorly timed jokes from a surgeon, Adrian replied, offering her a grin. I'm strictly here to help. No decorative human humor unless requested. The Queen let out a soft, amused exhalation, the first genuine sound that wasn't strained by pain. Adrian took it as a small victory and leaned closer, watching her faint, rhythmic pulsing of energy fields that had stabilized but remained precarious. Every twitch of her ears, every subtle shift in her breathing, was a signal he had to interpret. Misread one, and even the smallest adjustment could send her into shock. "So, doctor," she said, her voice teasing, "are you always this cautious, or is it just because I might die if you sneeze wrong?" Adrian laughed softly. "I've been cautious before, but I've never had stakes quite like this. Usually the worst I do is spill a tray of surgical instruments. Now, I'm juggling alien physiology, nanotech, and the possibility of interstellar scandal." Lysara's eyes sparkled faintly, a motion in her long ears indicating amusement or maybe mild disbelief. "Scandal, yes. Death, perhaps. But your human sense of humor, surprisingly adequate. Keep it up and I might allow you to survive the entire procedure." The tension in the room, though omnipresent, was punctuated by these light exchanges. Even as Adrian adjusted nanites, monitored the energy flow, and recalibrated bioconduits, he found small ways to ease the gravity. He commented on the hovering medical drones, giving each a nickname. One became Tiny Tyrant, a nod to its overzealous hovering, another Beepy for its incessant chirping. Lysara made subtle quips about their names, her ears twitching in ways Adrian began to interpret as genuine amusement. Hours passed in a rhythm that balanced precision with improvisation. Adrian carefully guided the nanites to mend microtears in neural conduits while stabilizing the energy flow through her thoracic nodes. Each adjustment was a gamble, a test of trust between human and alien. The Queen occasionally murmured dry commentary on his technique, comparing his movements to human dance routines, occasionally threatening to write a memoir detailing the folly of trusting humans with royal health. The advisors, murmuring, intensified as the procedure continued. One hovered slightly closer, whispering a melodic critique that Adrian interpreted as concern. Another, more experimental in his curiosity, projected holographic diagrams of alien emergency protocols, clearly intended to remind Adrian of the stakes. Adrian nodded politely, internally noting, "I see your point. But if I follow these exactly, she dies. Trust me, we'll get there." At one point, an unexpected spike in energy readings caused Adrian to freeze mid-motion. The Queen's ears twitched sharply and she opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "Relax, doctor, I assure you, panic is less beneficial than steady hands and sarcastic remarks. You seem to excel at the latter." Adrian swallowed. "Steady hands, yes. Sarcasm, marginally, but we'll combine forces." He focused, recalibrating the nanites and rerouting the bioconduits. Slowly, the erratic pulses smoothed, the microtears sealed, and the energy field stabilized further. A faint light of relief glimmered in the Queen's eyes, and her ears twitched in a rhythm that Adrian was beginning to understand as approval. "See," he murmured, boring heroism, delivered with human efficiency and a dash of sarcasm. Her lips twitched faintly, almost a smile. "You are insufferable, yet effective. Keep that up, and perhaps you'll leave this chamber alive and mildly irritating." The small drone, Beepy, chirped in agreement, and Adrian chuckled, realizing he had begun to anthropomorphize the tiny machine to cope with the tension. The room, once suffused with a heavy, almost oppressive gravity of life-or-death stakes, now had the faintest shimmer of camaraderie. He and Lysara were navigating the impossible together, a human surgeon and an alien queen, bound by wires, nanites, and an oddly effective sense of humor. Even as the procedure continued into its more intricate stages, Adrian allowed himself to note tiny absurdities. The way her ears flicked in response to the drone's chatter, the improbable elegance of her fingers as she subtly shifted, and the ridiculous thought that he might someday recount this moment as the day I saved a queen, and learned that interstellar diplomacy can be conducted with sarcastic remarks and coffee. Hours blended into one another, the slow, deliberate pace of the hybrid surgery demanding unwavering focus. Yet amid the precision and the danger, Adrian found fleeting moments of levity. A tiny glitch in a nanite, a misfiring diagnostic hologram projecting an alien cat chasing its tail, and Lysara's dry commentary on the absurdity of her own predicament. Each laugh, each shared quip, was a bridge across species, a fragile tether keeping fear at bay. By the end of the cycle, Lysara's systems were more stable than they had been since the attack. The pulse of energy was steady, her breathing even, and the twitches of her long ears now carried a rhythm Adrian interpreted as both relief and acknowledgement. She opened her eyes fully, the swirling amber and violet hues bright with a subtle vibrancy, and her lips curved faintly into something that approximated a smile. "You are remarkably persistent, Doctor," she said softly, her tone lighter, almost teasing. "I half expected incompetence, but I am pleasantly surprised. Perhaps humans are more adaptable than I gave credit for." Adrian allowed himself a small, genuine smile. "I try. Adaptable and caffeinated, two key traits for surviving interstellar medical crises." A soft, approving hum emanated from the advisors, though their faces remained inscrutable. The Queen's eyes remained fixed on him, her long ears flicking once, twice, a subtle acknowledgement that trust, however tentative, had begun to form. Adrian felt the tiniest surge of pride and relief. They had survived the first critical phase together, navigating untested techniques, alien physiology, and the high stakes of intergalactic politics with cautious humor and mutual respect. As he stepped back from the dais, adjusting the nanite interface one last time before allowing the drones to maintain monitoring, Adrian muttered under his breath, "One step closer. One queen, one improbable procedure, and a galaxy of potential disasters avoided." Lysara's voice followed him, faint but unmistakable. "Do not get too cocky, Doctor. We are only beginning, and your jokes, though tolerable, will not save you from what comes next." Adrian grinned, inhaling deeply. "Noted, Your Majesty. I'll keep my sarcasm sharp and my hands steady. Let's see what the next challenge has in store." And so, amid the hum of anti-gravity fields, the faint glow of stabilized bioenergy, and the quiet, sardonic companionship of an alien queen, Adrian braced himself for the next stage of an impossible, unprecedented, and thrilling journey. Adrian stood over the Queen's dais, the ambient hum of the ethereal Mandate *S engines vibrating softly beneath his feet, a rhythm that felt almost alive. He had spent days navigating the labyrinth of alien physiology, improvising surgical maneuvers with nanites that occasionally had the personality of stubborn cats, and listening to Lysara's dry, sardonic commentary on human incompetence. And yet now, as he surveyed her stabilized systems, he realized the final stage of the hybrid procedure was the only part that truly mattered. The delicate merging of human technique with alien bioengineering to repair the neural conduits that controlled her thoracic energy matrix. It was the point of no return. "You're looking tense, Doctor," Lysara said, her voice deceptively light, though her long ears twitched with faint anxiety. "Do you plan to faint, or are we saving that for dramatic effect?" Adrian laughed, even as his hands hovered over the nanite interface. "No fainting today, Your Majesty. We'll reserve dramatic exits for later, maybe for my autobiography. How a human nearly destroyed an empire but did not." The Queen's lips curved ever so slightly, a shadow of amusement, and her ears flicked in rhythm with the hum of the monitoring drones. Adrian had grown attuned to these subtle movements. He knew now that a single twitch could indicate pleasure, pain, fear, or sarcasm. Sometimes, he suspected, she was merely teasing him with the complexity of her biology. The procedure required absolute precision. The nanites, guided by his hands, had to repair microtears in neural conduits that ran like delicate tendrils beneath her chest, conduits that regulated her energy pulses and, by extension, her very life. A misstep could destabilize her entirely, or worse, trigger a catastrophic feedback loop that might collapse the Queen's biofield and the ship's medical systems simultaneously. Adrian's palms were steady, but his mind was racing, calculating, second-guessing, and joking all at once. "Be careful," she murmured, almost as if reading his thoughts. "I'd prefer not to become a cautionary tale for your fellow humans." "I promise," he said. "I've developed a new technique, careful heroism mixed with a generous sprinkling of human charm. It works about half the time, but hopefully will fall into the lucky half." The small drones hovered closer, beepy chirping with what Adrian swore sounded like encouragement, while Tiny Tyrant hovered imperiously, scanning every movement for flaws. He had grown fond of them, these mechanical assistants, and even found himself talking aloud to them as he worked. "Okay, Beepy, recalibrate the left thoracic conduit. Tiny Tyrant, stop judging me with your sensors. You have no sense of humor." Lysara's faint laugh echoed across the chamber. "Your jokes are tolerable, human. Barely. But I suppose we all need distractions when facing imminent mortality." As Adrian carefully guided the nanites into position, he observed the slow synchronization of her energy pulses with the adjustments he made. The rhythm of her life was fragile, almost musical, each beat precise and delicate. He realized he had become intimately attuned not only to her physiology but to her presence, her subtle cues, her sardonic wit, the very essence of her as a ruler and as a being. She was no longer just a patient. She was a partner in a tense ballet of life and trust. An unexpected spike in neural feedback made Adrian freeze mid-motion. The conduits shivered, and a faint electric hum filled the chamber. "Well," he muttered, "if we survive this, we can claim victory over physics itself." The Queen's ears twitched sharply. "Or prove that humans are audacious enough to flirt with disaster and live to tell the tale. Proceed." With steady hands, he recalibrated the nanites, rerouted energy flows, and guided the repair along the conduits. Sweat pricked at his brow, but he felt a surprising calm. He had survived impossible odds before, and now, faced with life or death on a scale that encompassed not only one being but the fate of an entire empire, he found himself embracing the chaos. Humor, he realized, was as vital as precision. Without it, the pressure would crush him. With it, he could move confidently, read the subtle signals, and keep both his nerves and Lysara's trust intact. Minutes stretched into an eternity as the repair progressed. The energy field shimmered under his touch, the nanites moving like tiny dancers along the conduits, and Lysara's eyes remained focused on him, unblinking and unwavering. Occasionally, she offered quips, comparing his surgical movements to human ballroom dancing, or questioning whether he had learned anything from hollow entertainment. Adrian countered with his own jokes, light and self-deprecating, weaving a fragile thread of levity through the tension. At one point, a minor glitch in a nanite projection caused a holographic duplicate of Lysara to appear, waving imperiously as if scolding him. Adrian groaned. "Great. I've angered the ghost of future mistakes. Excellent." Lysara's eyes sparkled with humor. "You amuse me, Doctor. That alone might justify your continued existence in this chamber." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the conduits hummed steadily. The energy pulses smoothed into a rhythm that suggested not just stabilization, but resilience. Adrian leaned back, exhausted but exhilarated. The Queen's long ears twitched in a relaxed rhythm, and her amber and violet eyes gleamed with something like approval. "You did it," she said softly, voice stronger than it had been in days. "I am alive, and by some miracle the Empire remains intact. Against all odds you have succeeded." Adrian allowed himself a genuine smile, feeling a warmth that went beyond professional satisfaction. "Well, I told you. Careful heroism with a dash of sarcasm. works wonders. Lysara's faint laugh was music to his ears, a sound that carried relief, amusement, and perhaps even respect. The advisors hovered closer, their expressions inscrutable but their energy field stabilizing around her in what Adrian guessed was approval. One whispered in the melodic hum of their language, "The human has done well." Another added, unpredictable yet effective, perhaps a bridge between worlds. As Adrian stepped back, he realized how profoundly he had changed. He was no longer the cautious, self-conscious surgeon who had stumbled into this starship. He had grown into a figure capable of navigating alien physiology, politics, and trust, finding balance in humor and precision alike. The absurdity of the situation had forced him to stretch, adapt, and embrace uncertainty with courage, and with laughter. The Queen, now fully conscious and stable, lifted her hand, her long fingers delicate yet commanding. "Dr. Keller, your presence has altered the course of history, and while I may never fully trust your species' coffee habits, I trust your hands." Adrian bowed slightly, a grin spreading across his face. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I trust your judgment too, and I'll work on earning your trust and maybe your tolerance for terrible jokes." A faint chuckle escaped Lysara, the first fully relaxed sound he had heard from her. "You have earned it, human. But do not get carried away. The universe remains full of dangers, and I have no intention of providing them all as practice for you." Adrian laughed, the tension finally easing as he allowed himself to revel in the moment. The Empire was safe, the Queen was alive, and somehow in the strangest, most improbable way, they had formed a connection that transcended species. Humor, trust, courage, and a willingness to embrace the absurd had carried them through. As he exited the chamber, Adrian looked back once more. Lysara's long ears twitched lightly, her eyes reflecting both amusement and an unspoken respect. He felt a sense of closure that was rare in his line of work, a feeling that the impossible had been faced, the stakes survived, and the journey had changed him fundamentally. He had entered as a human surgeon, cautious and uncertain. He left as someone who had touched the edge of interstellar life, bridged worlds with humor and care, and learned that courage often wore a mask of lightheartedness. The ethereal mandate hummed softly around him, the ship's engines thrumming like a heartbeat in the void, and Adrian allowed himself one last joke, muttered under his breath. "Next time, coffee first. Universe second." From the Queen's chamber came a faint, amused murmur. "Do not overestimate your priorities, Doctor, but do continue amusing me." And as the stars outside the viewport glimmered cold and distant, Adrian realized that in saving a queen, he had saved far more than a life. He had discovered the resilience of humor, trust, and human ingenuity amid the vast, unpredictable theater of the cosmos. The journey had ended, and yet somehow it felt as though it was only the beginning.